He watched her step onto the train and still didn't say the one thing that might have made her stay. Steam hisses loud against the platform, hot and sharp in the dry air. Lila's gloved hand tightens around the rail as the conductor calls, "All aboard!" Caleb stands just below, hat in his hands, boots planted like he's bracing against something you can't see. The wind lifts a loose strand of her hair, brushing his sleeve, and neither of them moves. The train jolts once, metal groans, and still, he doesn't speak. What was he waiting for? Tell me, would you have turned back? There are evenings in the desert that feel like they already belong to memory. The light settles low and slow over the red hills, turning everything softer than it is. Fence posts, dust, the edges of a man's shoulders as he leans into his work. Even the wind seems to quiet, like it knows not to disturb what's about to pass. Lila Monroe sat in the wooden chair on the porch, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze resting somewhere beyond the horizon. The boards beneath her feet still held the day's heat. Behind her, the screen door creaked once in the breeze and then stilled again. Caleb Turner sat beside her, one chair over, his hat resting on his knee. He had come in not long ago, boots carrying the dust of the pasture, shirt sleeves rolled and marked with the pale lines where sweat had dried. He hadn't said much since sitting down. That was his way. The sky was turning that deep amber color that came just before the sun dropped behind the mountains. "Tomorrow I'll be gone," Lila said. She didn't look at him when she said it. She kept her eyes on the line where the land met the sky, as if saying it out loud might make it settle into something real. Caleb didn't answer right away. He shifted once, slow, like a man easing into a thought. The boards creaked under his weight. Somewhere out past the barn, a gate tapped gently in the wind, not quite latched. He glanced at her then. Not quickly, not searching, just looking. "I know," he said. That was all. The kind of answer that didn't try to change anything. The sun dipped lower. The light moved across the porch, catching in the loose strands of her hair, turning them gold for a moment, before the color faded again. She rubbed her thumb against her palm without noticing, a small habit she had when she was thinking too much. He watched that for a second, then looked away. It hadn't started here. It had started weeks ago, in a place that smelled of rope and flour and iron nails. A narrow store with a plank floor worn smooth by years of boots coming and going. A bell above the door that rang every time someone stepped inside. Lila had been standing at the counter, a sack of flour resting against her hip. She had counted her coins twice before placing them down. The clerk had stepped away to fetch something from the back. That was when Caleb had come in. He had crossed the room with that same unhurried pace, set a coil of wire on the counter, and reached for the edge of it at the same moment she did. Their hands had stopped. Not touching. Just close enough that either one could have finished the movement. "Excuse me," he had said, already pulling his hand back. He stepped aside, giving her the space as if it had always belonged to her. No hesitation. No look over his shoulder to see who was watching. She had nodded once. Quiet. Not sure what to do with that kind of courtesy. Out here, most things were quicker. Rougher. People didn't pause unless they had to. He had waited until she finished. Then he paid, tipped his hat once, and left. She had thought about it longer than she expected. The next time she saw him was at her aunt's place. Martha Green's house sat at the edge of town, where the last of the fences gave way to open land. The garden out back was half beans, half stubborn ground that refused to yield to anything but patience. The fence had been leaning for months. "He said he'd take a look," Martha had muttered that morning, wiping her hands on her apron. Man knows his way around wood and wire. Lila had been carrying a bucket from the well when she saw him. Same hat, Same steady way of moving, like he had no need to hurry for anything. He didn't say much when he worked, just measured, cut, and set things right, with the kind of care that didn't ask to be noticed. She brought him water. He took it with a quiet "thank you, ma'am," and drank without lifting his eyes for long. The second week, she brought coffee instead. He stayed a little longer. By the third, the fence didn't need fixing anymore, but he came anyway. There were always small things, a loose board, a hinge that didn't sit right, a post that had shifted in the dry ground. Or maybe there weren't. Martha had started finding reasons to be inside during those hours. The door left just slightly ajar, the sound of dishes clinking in the background that didn't quite match the time of day. Lila noticed. She didn't say anything. The afternoons stretched. They would sit on the porch when the work was done. 2 chairs, a table between them with a chipped enamel cup and whatever had been left from supper. The land opened wide in front of them, nothing to block the view. They talked sometimes, about the creek, about how long the dry spell might last, about a book she had brought with her, its pages already soft at the edges. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it came out plain. No extra words. No guessing what he meant. She found herself waiting for that. Now the porch felt smaller than it had all summer. The light shifted again, pulling back from the boards, leaving them in shadow. The air cooled just enough to notice. Lila drew a breath. "I wasn't supposed to stay," she said, more to the space in front of her than to him. "Just a few weeks. Help Aunt Martha. Go back." Caleb nodded once. He knew that too. The train left at 8 in the morning, eastbound, back to a place with streets that stayed crowded and buildings that didn't let the sky stretch the way it did here. He picked up his hat, turning it once in his hands. "You got a place there," he said. It wasn't a question. She gave a small nod. "Yeah." Another pause. The kind that settled in your chest before you understood why. She turned then, finally looking at him. "You deserve someone who belongs here," she said. She meant it the way people mean things when they're trying to be kind, when they're trying to put something in its proper place before it grows into something harder to leave behind. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. Slow, starting somewhere behind his eyes before it reached his mouth. "Funny," he said, voice low and even. "I thought maybe you did." The wind moved through the yard, lifting a line of dust along the fence he had fixed weeks ago. Lila held his gaze just a second too long. Then she looked away. Neither of them said anything after that. The sun slipped behind the mountains, and the light went with it. Morning came early in Red Hollow. Dust lifted off the road before the heat even settled in. Wagons rolled through town with that slow, steady rhythm, wheels creaking against dry wood. A dog barked somewhere behind the livery. The bell on the general store door rang once, then again. Lila stepped out with a small folded list in her hand. Flour, sugar, thread. Martha had pressed a few coins into her palm before she left, along with a quiet reminder to ask for a receipt this time. "Mr. Talbot writes things down," she had said. "You just make sure he writes yours, too." The store smelled the same as always. Burlap, iron, a faint trace of tobacco. Lila moved along the shelves, careful not to brush against anything she didn't need. Her skirt caught once on a crate nail. She freed it without a word. Voices drifted from the counter. Men talking low, not hiding it, not exactly. Just enough that you could hear if you stood close. "She's staying out by Green's place, ain't she, so? Longer than a visit, looks like." Lila reached for a spool of thread and held it a second longer than necessary before placing it in her basket. The bell rang again. She didn't turn right away, but she felt it. The shift in the room, the quiet that followed. Caleb stepped inside, hat low, shoulders carrying the morning sun behind him. He paused just inside the door, letting his eyes adjust. Same way he always did. He nodded once toward Mr. Talbot, set a short list on the counter, and waited. No hurry. Lila finished at the shelf and moved toward the counter. Her basket rested against her hip again, same place as before. She set it down and slid the coins forward. Mr. Talbot counted them slow, wrote something down in a narrow ledger with a pencil worn flat on one side, tore off a small slip and handed it to her. She folded it once, tucked it into her glove. "Afternoon, Miss Monroe," he said, polite enough. "Morning," she answered. She picked up her basket. One of the men leaned his elbow on the counter, watching without looking like he was watching. "You settling in all right out there?" he asked. The tone wasn't sharp, not friendly either, just something in between that asked more than the words did. Lila met his gaze for a moment. "I am," she said. He nodded once, like that was an answer he could put away and talk about later. She turned to leave. That was when the man behind him let out a short laugh under his breath. Not loud, not meant to carry. But it did. Lila stopped at the door. Her hand rested on the handle. The wood was warm from the sun already. She didn't turn back. The room held still. Then boots moved. Caleb stepped away from the counter, slow, measured, not toward the men, not toward the door, just forward. He came to stand beside her, not touching, not close enough to crowd, just there, between her and the rest of the room without making a show of it. He looked at the door, not at anyone behind them. "You headed back out?" he asked. His voice sounded the same as always. Even. Plain. Lila glanced at him. "Yeah." He nodded once. "I'll walk that way." He pushed the door open. The bell rang again. The light outside spilled in, bright and wide. She stepped through first. He followed. The door closed behind them, cutting off the room and whatever was left unsaid inside it. They walked side by side down the main road, not speaking at first. Dust kicked up under their boots. A wagon passed going the other direction, driver tipping his hat without slowing. Caleb kept his hands loose at his sides. No rush, no need to explain anything. At the edge of town, where the last building gave way to open land, he slowed. "That your list?" he asked, nodding toward her basket. She lifted it slightly. Most of it. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small folded paper, held it out. "You missed nails," he said. She looked at the paper, then at him. "I didn't." He shrugged once. "Fence on the north side'll need them come next wind." She hesitated a second, then took the paper. Their fingers brushed. Quick, gone before it settled. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. They stood there a moment longer than necessary. Wind moved through the grass, carrying the dry smell of earth and something faintly sweet from Martha's garden behind them. "Town talks," he said after a while, not looking at her, just stating it. "I noticed." He shifted his weight, eyes on the horizon. "Doesn't change much." Lila studied him for a second. "No," she said. "It doesn't." But something had shifted. Not in the town. In the space between them. He tipped his hat once and then turned back toward the road, heading in the direction of his ranch. She watched him go until the dust settled behind his boots. Then she turned the other way, toward the house at the edge of town, the basket still warm against her side, the folded paper in her hand. That afternoon, he came to fix a hinge that didn't need fixing. He stayed an hour. Martha kept herself inside. And when the work was done, they sat on the porch again. 2 chairs, a cup between them, and the kind of silence that had started to feel like something shared. The air had changed, not in a way you could point to, nothing you could name. But the wind carried something heavier than dust that evening, something that pressed low against the land. Even the horses in the distance stood quieter than usual, heads turned toward the hills like they were waiting on a sound that hadn't arrived yet. Lila felt it before she saw it. She stood at the edge of the porch, one hand resting against the post, looking west. The sky had gone from pale blue to a dull, bruised gray, the color settling uneven across the horizon. "You get storms like that often?" she asked. Caleb followed her gaze. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Not this late," he said. He set his cup down on the table, slow and careful, like he didn't want to waste the motion. Then he stood. "I should get back." Lila nodded once, though her eyes stayed on the sky. He stepped off the porch, boots hitting the dirt with a soft thud. Halfway to the gate, he stopped, looked back. "You best stay inside tonight," he said. She didn't answer right away. Then, "I've seen weather before." He held her gaze for a second. Not arguing, just measuring. "Not like this," he said. Then he turned and headed down the road, the wind already catching at the edge of his coat. The storm didn't wait for night. It came fast. By the time Lila helped Martha pull the last of the laundry from the line, the first gust hit hard enough to slam the back door open. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. "Get that latched," Martha called, her voice raised just enough to carry. Lila pushed the door shut and dropped the iron hook into place. The wood rattled under her hand. Outside, the sky had gone nearly black. The first drops came heavy, wide. Then the rain turned sideways, and then the wind. It tore across the yard like it had something to prove. The fence line bent, snapped back, bent again. Something loose banged against the side of the barn. Lila stood at the window, watching through the blur. Then she saw it, a lantern moving in the distance. Low, unsteady. She didn't think. She grabbed her shawl from the hook, wrapped it once around her shoulders, and pushed the door open against the wind. "Lila!" Martha called after her, but the storm swallowed the sound. The ground was slick under her boots, mud already forming where the dust had been just hours ago. She kept her head down, moving toward the light. Caleb's ranch sat a mile out. Tonight, it felt farther. The gate was open when she reached it, banging loose on one hinge. She caught it with one hand and shoved it back, heart pounding harder now from more than just the run. Voices came through the storm, low, sharp, then a crash. She rounded the corner of the barn and saw him. Caleb stood in the mud, one arm braced against a half-fallen beam, the other pulling at a rope tied too tight around a panicked horse. The animal jerked back, hooves sliding. "Easy," he muttered, though the wind took most of the word. Lila moved without asking. She grabbed the rope from the other side, steadying it just enough for him to loosen the knot. The horse pulled again, then settled as the tension eased. He looked up then. Rain ran down his face, cutting clean lines through the dust. "You shouldn't be here," he said. She didn't answer, just shifted her grip. Another crack split the air, louder this time. The roof above the far stall lifted, then dropped hard, one side giving way. "Back!" he called. He caught her arm before she could step forward, pulled her in close as the wood came down behind them, splintering against the ground. For a second, everything stopped. Not the storm, just the space between them. Her hand pressed against his chest, his grip still firm around her arm, close enough to feel the heat through the soaked fabric, close enough to hear his breath over the wind. Then he let go, stepped back first. "Stay there," he said, already moving again. They worked without speaking after that, tying what could be tied, cutting loose what couldn't, guiding the animals into the far corner where the roof still held. Time lost its shape. By the time the storm began to break, the lantern had burned low, and the rain had softened into something steady and thin. They sat on an overturned trough just inside the barn. Mud streaked their hands. A thin line of red marked Caleb's knuckles where something had caught him. Lila's sleeve was torn near the wrist. Neither of them mentioned it. He stared out at the dark yard, jaw set. "Should have sent you back to town," he said after a while. "Wouldn't have to see this." Lila wiped her hands on the edge of her skirt, leaving darker marks where the water hadn't dried yet. "I didn't come here to be kept safe," she said. He glanced at her then. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, not quite, just something settling into place. The wind died down. The night held. And for the first time since the storm began, neither of them moved to leave. The night settled slow after that. The storm had taken what it wanted and moved on, leaving the land quieter than before, as if even the wind had spent itself. Water dripped from the edge of the broken roof in steady intervals. Somewhere in the dark, a horse shifted, the sound soft against the damp earth. Lila sat with her hands resting on her knees, her fingers still marked with dirt that wouldn't wash clean until morning. Caleb leaned forward slightly, forearms on his thighs, looking out into the yard that no longer looked the same. "Fence'll need resetting," he said after a while. It wasn't about the fence. Lila nodded anyway. "Boards, too." Another pause. "You always stay when things break?" he asked, not looking at her. She let out a quiet breath. "I don't always get asked to leave," she said. That drew his eyes. For a second, it looked like he might say something else, something that had been waiting longer than tonight. But he didn't. Instead, he stood, wiped his hands against his shirt, and reached for the lantern. "I'll see you back," he said. They walked the road in near silence. The mud clung to their boots, slowing each step. The sky had cleared just enough for a few stars to show through, faint and scattered. At Martha's gate, he stopped. "You'll be heading out soon," he said. She rested her hand on the top rail. "In a few days." He nodded. "That's what you came for." She didn't answer. He tipped his head once, then turned and walked back the way they came, the lantern light growing smaller with each step until it disappeared behind the bend. The days that followed moved faster than the ones before. The sun came back strong. The ground dried in patches, leaving cracked lines where the water had settled. Repairs began everywhere. Fences lifted back into place, roofs patched with whatever wood could be spared. Caleb worked longer hours. Lila saw him less. When she did, it was brief. A nod across the yard. A few words exchanged over a tool or a piece of wire. Nothing that lingered long enough to become something more. Martha said little, but she moved through the house with a quiet purpose. Folding clothes. Sorting what would be packed and what would stay. A small trunk sat open by the bed, half filled. Lila added to it slowly. A dress she hadn't worn since arriving. A book with a cracked spine. The receipt from Mr. Talbot's store, folded and refolded until the edges had softened. On the last evening, the porch waited. Same 2 chairs, same table. The wood still marked faintly where the rain had hit it hardest. Caleb arrived just before sunset. He didn't knock, didn't need to. He stepped up onto the porch, removed his hat, and took his usual seat. For a while, neither of them spoke. The sky did what it always did. Colors stretching, then fading, then giving way. "You got everything packed?" he asked. "Most of it." "Train's still at 8. "Yes." The words came easy. The kind that didn't cost anything. The ones that mattered stayed where they were. Lila watched the last line of light slip behind the mountains. "You deserve someone who belongs here," she said. This time she looked at him when she said it. Caleb didn't look away. "I thought maybe you did," he answered. The same words, but they landed different now. He didn't smile this time. Neither did she. The silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It held more. Too much, maybe. She turned her gaze back to the horizon. "If I stayed," she said, quieter now, "it wouldn't be simple." He let out a breath. "Nothing worth keeping is." She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them again. Morning came without asking. The station sat at the edge of town, little more than a platform and a narrow office with a clock that ran a few minutes slow. The tracks cut straight through the land, disappearing into heat on one side and distance on the other. Martha handled the tickets. Caleb carried the trunk. Lila stood with her smaller bag in hand, watching the empty stretch of track. The train could be heard before it was seen. A low, steady rumble building under the ground. Caleb set the trunk down near the platform steps. "That's everything," he said. She nodded. "Thank you." He shifted his weight slightly, hands loose at his sides. "It was a good summer," she said. The words felt small the moment they left her mouth, but they were the only ones she had. Caleb nodded once. It was. The train pulled in, steam rising, wheels grinding against metal. People moved. Voices carried. The world filled in around them. Lila picked up her bag. Caleb stepped back just enough to give her space. No reaching. No stopping. She climbed the steps. At the top, she paused. Not long, just enough to turn. He stood where she had left him, hat in his hands now, eyes steady. She looked at him. Then she nodded once and stepped inside. The train pulled away slow, then faster. Red Hollow shrank behind her. The porch, the fence, the road, all of it slipping back into the distance. Caleb didn't move until the last car disappeared. Then he put his hat back on, picked up the empty space where the trunk had been, and walked back toward the road that led home. The dust had already settled by the time he reached the gate. It stood where it always had. One hinge still a little loose from the storm, the wood worn smooth where hands had pushed it open 100 times before. He stopped there a moment, one hand resting on the top rail, looking out over the stretch of land that didn't look any different than it had yesterday. But it did. The yard felt wider, quieter, like something had stepped out of it and left no mark behind. He pushed the gate open and walked through. The house waited the same way it always had. Door closed, porch empty, 2 chairs still set side by side, one angled just slightly toward the other. He noticed that without meaning to. Inside, the air held the faint smell of coffee from the morning before. A cup still sat near the edge of the table, where it had been left. He didn't move it. Days passed. The kind that didn't ask much from a man. Fence posts, feed, water. Small repairs that filled the hours without changing anything. The town carried on. People talked the way people do. The train came and went. The store bell rang. Receipts were folded and tucked away. Nothing stopped. Caleb didn't go into town unless he had to. When he did, he kept it short. Paid what he owed. Took what he needed. Left. At the store, Mr. Talbot handed him a small folded paper one afternoon. "Came with the freight," he said. "For you." Caleb took it without asking. The paper was thinner than the kind used for accounts. The handwriting careful, but not practiced in writing for others. He didn't open it there. He waited until he got home. Sat at the table. Set his hat down beside him. Then unfolded it once. The words were simple. She wrote about the city. About a room that faced a brick wall. about a desk near a window that didn't open, about the way the streets stayed loud even at night, like they didn't trust silence. She asked about the fence, about the roof, about the horses. Nothing more. He read it twice. Then he folded it again, slower this time, and set it in the drawer near the stove. His reply came 3 days later, short, direct. The fence was holding. The roof had been patched. The horses were fine. He didn't add anything else. The letters found their way back and forth after that. Not often. Not regular enough to count on. But steady. She wrote about things that didn't matter much. Then, little by little, things that did. He answered the same way. Not more than needed, but never less than true. Winter came early that year. The cold settled into the boards of the house, into the hinges, into the ground itself. The porch saw less use. The chairs stayed where they were, but no one sat in them after sundown. One evening he brought her letter outside anyway. Sat in the cold longer than he should have. Read it once, then again. She wrote about the window, about how she found herself looking at it in the evenings, even when there was nothing to see. About how she had started leaving it open, just a crack, even when the air turned cold. He folded the paper in half, then in half again, set it on his knee. The next letter he sent took longer. He wrote it inside at the table, stopped once, started again. When he finished, he read it through without changing anything. Then he sealed it. Weeks passed before the answer came. He didn't go to town that morning. The letter was brought out with the rest of the mail, tied in a bundle with twine. He cut it loose with his knife, opened it standing right there by the gate. The paper held just one page, 2 paragraphs. The first said she had read his letter. The second said, "I've been thinking about what you wrote, about the place you described. I thought it was the land. I'm not so sure anymore." He read it again. Then he folded it, slower this time, and placed it back in his pocket. March came with wind, the kind that carried the last of winter out and didn't quite bring spring with it yet. The train was due in the afternoon. He stood at the edge of the platform, hat in his hands, same as before, same place, same boards under his boots. People moved around him. He didn't look at them. The train came in with the same sound it always did. Metal on metal, steam rising. Passengers stepped down, one after another. He watched without moving. Then he saw her. She stepped off with a small bag in her hand. No trunk this time. No hesitation in the way she moved. She saw him. Stopped. The distance between them held for a moment. Not long. Just enough. Then he stepped forward. She didn't. He crossed the space. Same as he had before. No hurry. No second thoughts. He stopped in front of her. She looked up at him. "Caleb," she said. "Lila," he answered. That was all. No reaching. No promises spoken out loud. But neither of them stepped back. The wind moved across the platform, catching the edge of her coat. He took her bag without asking. She let him. They walked off the platform together, back toward the road that led out of town, toward the house that hadn't felt right without her in it, toward the porch with 2 chairs. This time, neither of them spoke about leaving. And maybe that's how you know something is real. Not when it's loud, not when it demands to be seen, but when it settles into the quiet parts of a life and stays there without asking permission. If you had been standing on that porch, feeling the heat of the boards under your boots, watching the light fade behind those red hills, you might have told yourself the same thing Lila did. that it was just a season, just a stop along the way, that some places aren't meant to be kept. But then something shifts, not all at once, not in a way you can point to, just in the way a chair feels less empty, in the way silence starts to sound like understanding, in the way you begin to notice what's missing, only after it's gone. And maybe that's the truth of it. Love doesn't always arrive with a promise. Sometimes it waits. It gives you the distance to see clearly. It asks you to choose, not out of fear, but because something in you finally feels like it belongs. So if you've ever walked away from something you couldn't quite name, or found yourself wondering if you missed the place you were meant to stay, you're not alone. Tell me, would you have gotten on that train? And if stories like this stay with you a little longer than most, there are more waiting just down the trail.